But I do feel like you need to go through that pipeline of writing this article, writing that article, having the editor scream at you, or just scream in general. You need to go along the path. And I feel like as newspapers dry up, it's going to be a little more complicated. It's going to be a little harder to do that. But I find that when you have a foundation like that, that's just ground in solid journalism, solid writing, you can't take that away.
You are the first of your kind on our podcast, and I'm excited for this convo because I feel like, especially now with social media and captions and Facebook posts and LinkedIn posts, everybody finds themselves feeling like they can be a writer. And for me, it's almost like the 300 Chrysler versus the Maybach, right? I was like, I feel like I'll write a caption and be like, man, I killed that caption. And then I'll read one of your liner notes and be like, nah, I ain't right. Like that ain't like, I ain't got it. Like, like I ain't writing yet. So you're a journalist, right? I'll give you that title, but you're also, I feel like you have evolved as journalism has evolved to, you're really a tastemaker. You're a curator. You're this glue between the culture that then becomes the culture. You touch all facets of it. So I don't even know how to describe Marcus. So I'm a shut up and let you describe who is Marcus J. Moore.
That is a fair question, and it's something I've been wrestling with here too as of late. But I would say more than anything else, journalist, author, curator are the things that sort of capture it all at this moment.
Journalist, author, curator, JAC. If we can find a K word, then you can be a jack of all trades. You just got to figure out what that K word is. I'm gonna find it out.
Okay.
See, I like that. Journalist, author, curator. So
yeah,
that's editing. We're gonna put journalist, author, curator when you say that.
Yeah. I would say that's the best way to do it, man. Because I've definitely gotten into, even as of late, curating shows at different venues. Like I just locked in a show yesterday at Dumbo House. Quelle Chris.
Nice. Oh, wow. So that's the thing about Marcus that most people don't know. Marcus to say, I have an idea. When did I see you, Marcus? 4 months ago, something like that?
Yeah, it was like 4 months ago.
And Marcus would be like, man, I got this idea. And then 4 months later, you'll talk to me and be like, yo, just yesterday, that idea I had, it's a thing now. I actually made it happen in real life. And you are a doer. You're one of those people where you don't say much, but when you say it, there's like a 99% chance it's going to happen.
That's
on that.
That's what I try to do, man, because we all know people in this industry where they'll say a bunch of stuff. They'll say like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm doing that. And then when you tap in with them, even 3 months later, it's like, well, what happened to the thing, man? And it's like, oh, well, you know how I go. You get stuff like that. Oh, you know how it is, man. It's like, no, I never want to be that person, but I also understood that I offer something different. Like it's one thing if I was at these venues and I said, hey, I want to bring, this big name artist or that big name artist, but I always want to travel. I always want to be on the road less traveled. You know what I'm saying? So if I can bring somebody like a Quelle to Dumbo House, or if I can bring like super dope cats who are notable, but maybe more eyes need to be on them, I'm always going to do that. And so I think that's why the ideas sort of lock in more often than not. It's because it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. We should probably get that person in this space. And then they're introduced to more people that they weren't introduced to before, that they didn't know about before.
I love it. So let's rewind, because you started at the Curator, which is dope, at Dumbo House. Like that's not no small feat. But how did you start as a journalist? What's the origin story for Marcus the journalist?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the full on story, and then you can decide to edit out what you want. But so I was always one of these kids that just loved writing. Even when I was like 5 and 6 years old, I'm writing things on the wall of my mom's home. I'm listening to my granddad talk about what's on the news. And so I always had this love of writing that I didn't know what to do with until high school, when I was in yearbook class of all places. And I had this teacher, Mrs. Kilby, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. She suggested that I enroll in the urban journalism workshop, WABJ journalism workshop, where every Saturday I had to go up to Howard University and we had to literally go around and pull together stories. There were mentors there were editors there, and we were paired up with different editors. We had to go cover the cherry blossoms. We had to talk to people on the street. We actually had to do stories. And so that sort of ignited something in me where it's just like, I was always a shy kid, but it was kind of exciting to be able to walk up to people and be like, hey, how do you feel about such and such? And people talk back, and developing those relationships. Even though I was shy, I also like curating relationships with people. And so that was high school. And then the bug was just there. I just knew automatically that's what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to, at the heart of it, I just wanted to tell people something they didn't know about. That's always what I'm going to do. And so, yeah, I just kind of kept with it in college. When I went to Bowie State University, the first thing I did was made a beeline for the student newspaper. I was a writer, was promoted up to be an editor. And then after a while, I was editor in chief of the Bowie State newspaper. And then, not to take a cliche, but the snowball just kept going. So I applied. I started out at the Prince George's Sentinel newspaper in Lanham, super small newspaper. So I was there for like 6 months. And then I got tapped to go over to the Gazette newspaper, which was bigger circulation, big local paper. So I was at the Gazette from like 2004 to 2010. And I was covering it. I started out covering the city of Bowie, but then I covered everything from education to politics to crime, like hardcore crime and all kinds of stuff, man. And then in 2010, I was covering a school board meeting in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I literally said to myself under my breath, I can't do this anymore, because I knew what stories they were going to talk about. I can predict them before it even came up on the agenda. And so that's when I decided to marry my love of journalism with my love of music, because I always knew that I wanted to cover music. And I just started. I launched a website called DMV Spectrum. And it didn't even last long because it got lumped into what I was doing at the city paper. The city paper took interest in what I was doing. And DMV Spectrum lasted from like 2009 to 2010. And then everything that I did from there was just all city paper. Like I was pretty much a staffer there. I was covering everything. So that's sort of the abridged version of how I got into journalism and how I sort of evolved into music journalist.
I love the story, man. And there's a common thread for the people who I call the glue, meaning if the artist is what we think about when we say music industry, the glue are all the people around them. The common thread is almost always a teacher at the high school level introducing somebody to something that pushes them into their career. And so big ups to the teachers. What was the teacher's name again?
Ms. Kilby.
Big ups to Miss Kilby, because those are the unsung heroes in all of our stories where it's like there was this seed inside of you that you didn't even know was there. You get exposed to something, you now fall in love with it, and fast forward years later, you make a living doing this thing that, again, like high school papers and yearbook classes are things that we don't think about. Like we big up the football, the basketball, the track, the cheerleader, the homecoming king, but those programs in those schools are the foundations of what's to come in the real world, right? That the chances of you being a professional athlete, slim to none, but the chances of you finding a profession in writing, super high. And if you have a passion for it, which you do, then it translates into great writing, which you execute. So I love that. And then I want to say this about DMV Spectrum / City Paper. Your name was like, I just gave advice yesterday in one of our webinars to artists where I was like, look, end of year, there's always lists. If I'm an artist and I'm trying to come up, I'm going to go find those lists. And that becomes my hit list of who I want to work with. And don't work with people you don't like. But I look at the list, listen to the music. And if there's somebody I like on there, I put them on my vision board for the year. And that's how I built my career from the beginning. The reason this is like kismet and like I love this connection and our real friendship is before I knew you personally, I knew your writings. Because you
Oh
were the
wow.
person that was curating my list. Like I wasn't going out to find the next artist. I wasn't like I only know about Uptown XO because of Marcus J. Moore. So when I work with Uptown XO years later, it's thanks to you. I only know about a Masego. I only know about Fat Trell. Like you were the curator, real life curator for my vision board list of who I wanted to work with. So the writings
Oh
that you
man.
did, DMV Spectrum, City Paper, and then we'll get into Washington Post and all that, was really it makes people like me lazy, but like I'm just like I'm gonna wait till Marcus says it's hot, and then I'm gonna go check it out, and then that's who I'm
Oh
gonna work with.
man. Man, that means a lot because, I used to bristle at that word tastemaker, like, oh, I'm just a dude. I just like music. I'm just trying to put people on to stuff. But I knew that things were different even back then when stuff that I would suggest, all of a sudden people are talking about it. And it's like, that's kind of new territory for me. And it's still happening on a bigger scale now where it's like even down to like Bandcamp.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll buy a record on Bandcamp just to be supportive. It's like, oh, that's just a dope record. Let me drop $10 on it or whatever. And then that's when I get the email from the artist. Oh, thank you so much for buying the record. Here's like the WAV file. Here's some unreleased tracks. And I'm like, yo, I just I just want to support you real quick. Like I ain't trying to be because my thing with that is like, what if you don't like it? Because I know my tastes are a little kind of off a little bit. So I'm like, well, what if I suggest something you don't like? And I know I'm jumping around, but it goes back to that too, where it's like I just thought EXO was super dope. I thought that Diamond District was great. I loved Fat Trail. And I always want to make sure that I shout out Truth from Godzilla because he was the first person that I reached out to, even when I was driving home from the school board meeting. And I was just like, yo, I know I got this website, DMV Spectrum. I know I want to do this, but I know nobody in the scene. He was the one walking me around to people at the open mic, the UAU open mic, like, hey, this is my man Marcus from high school, super dope writer. You should know him. So I know all these people from the scene because of Truth. And I always want to give him that credit because he was the dude that was throwing that lob. He was the Gary Payton, the Jason Kidd.
So
I was just trying to dunk it.
You know what's crazy? So I think the week this podcast episode comes out, the record I have with Godzilla drops. So to show you full circle,
yeah,
I only know Godzilla because you wrote about the Up and Up. And until you just said that, I was talking to Davina. I was saying, Up and Up was in our DNA in the DMV. Me specifically, our company, our movement was built like Up and Up is a big part of it. And I kept telling Davina, I don't remember how I knew about the Up and Up. Like I don't remember what got me in that building. But now that you're saying that, it was you, and it wasn't even an article on them. You referenced it in talking about something else.
mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is the UAU? Like, and you were like something on U Street, da da da. And I went, and when I went, that energy, for those watching not from the DMV, the UAU open mic hosted by Truth Hall and his brothers Godzilla, in a collective, did this open mic, neo soul vibe, like grown and sexy, but we were like in our 20s, like, but you would think people were much older just the way they carried themselves. Cause it was like,
right.
The DC area has like a professional Black middle class and has for years. So this is where that group who had government jobs or teaching jobs or, decent jobs could come on a Tuesday night, get a drink and listen to up and coming artists. And you're right. Like the taste making from Up and Up, like Ari Lennox, like,
Yeah.
Raheem Devon, like, there's just people that would grace that stage who now are massive names, but it was just a regular artist sharing their gift with a group of people who appreciated artistry. And so shout out to Truth, but yes, that's full circle. I'm doing a record, working with Godzilla has been on my vision board list for over 10 years. I'm finally putting a record out with them officially, but that's the show. Again, when I talk about you being a curator and tastemaker, this record doesn't happen without you. So like, there's a power to you, man. Like, I hope you know that. Like,
I'm learning, but I can't even take full credit. Shout out to my therapist, man. My therapist be beating me up every Monday. Just like, oh man, like, like he be hitting me with them bars every Monday, and he gives me homework and all of that. So admittedly, like the old me would be like, oh, well, I'm just trying to do what I can. But now, yeah, I am starting to realize, like, look, I can keep this chip on my shoulder. But if literally everybody else is saying the exact opposite, all of these people must know what they're talking about. If everybody says the same thing, then it must be true. So I'm definitely learning now. I'm leaning into it, but I'm also not resting on my laurels. I'm not trying to make it like, oh well, I've made it. No, no. I appreciate it, everything, but like I'm still pushing to get better. Absolutely.
You are him. I'm gonna say it all the time.
Oh man.
You are him. So okay, so that makes sense. You just cracked a piece of my code for the up and up. So you're doing like school board, the Gazette, which a lot of counties have and cities have, is like one layer beneath like your big paper, but it's the paper that more people are commonly, it's the sports paper for high schoolers. It's a local paper, so like most people know what the Gazette is, but you're not doing music stuff. You make this transition and you say you're going to blend these worlds. Talk me through that like transition and shift for you, and what you thought was needed. Like what void were you filling with that, not just for yourself but for the world?
Well, I felt like when I first went into that transition, that it started out with me just wanting to cover stuff that I thought was cool. And this is another person I got to give credit to is the singer Tisha Marie. She was a classmate of mine at Suitland. And I remember this vividly when I knew that I wanted to start covering music. I'm not sure I understand. All
Sarah,
good.
listen, boy.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So no, I'll go back. So it's like I remember it was when I wanted to cover music, but I didn't know how to start. And I was sitting there thinking on it. And there was she had an album release. She had an album release party in Virginia, dead of summer. It was August. I was like, I don't feel like driving way out here, man. But I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go support my friend. So I go out there and we're having a conversation, and she's like, I got this really cool record, and I don't think anybody's gonna cover it. So I buy the CD to be supportive. I play it on the way home, and I'm like, this is actually a dope record. And so in 2008, I had written a piece for The Root and did a chat on WashingtonPost.com about OK Player. And so I had connections at OK Player, and I knew that they were starting to ramp up their music coverage. And they had a writer on there named Jason Reynolds, who was covering music. And I was like, yo, this dude is a super dope writer. I need to write like him, So anyway, with that parameter, I reached out to OKP. I reviewed the record for OKP, and then they brought me into the rotation because they liked how I write. So to get right to the heart of your question, I felt like I brought a certain humanity to music journalism, because as much as I love music journalism, I know that my kind can be a little presumptuous, self-righteous. I'm reviewing this record for this big publication, and my opinion is the most important opinion on this thing. I never wanted to be that person. I always wanted to approach my writing, and I still approach it as like, hey, here's the thing that I think is cool. Here's why I think it's cool. And if you get with it, cool. That's great. That's amazing. But if not, no problem. Whereas I feel like other writers, other music journalists, sort of take offense when you push back against their opinion. Whereas I'm on the other side, like music is totally subjective. So I could like Tisha Marie's record, and you're like, no, I don't like it at all, and it's fine. Like we get it. So that's what I wanted to bring to the world, man. I just wanted to make sure that whatever I was writing about, whether it was Tisha, whether it was Godzilla, whether it was XO, Diamond District, that I still render an opinion, like, because I'm not gonna like everything, but I'm also not being heavy-handed with the narrative. I'm if it's something I don't like, it's like I try to accentuate what's good, talk about what I didn't like, and come down the middle. And a lot of people weren't doing that. And I think that served me well in DC, because as you know, DC is a small town. I can not like somebody's record and still see them at the open mic, and they may have a problem. But I've never had any issues. I've never had, even when I didn't like something, the person would roll up on me and just be like, I respect it. Like, I get it. Maybe you'll like this next thing. So that's what I try to do, man, is just sort of marry the humanity to the actual work. And it also kind of evolved from like, I was writing, but then by 2014, I'm at WTOP FM, and I'm having a conversation with an editor, and they discover that that I like music. And they're like, "Oh, well, you have a good voice. Would you want to talk about it on air?" And I was like, okay. So I reviewed Earl Sweatshirt on air, Kendrick Lamar's "To Pimp a Butterfly" on air, and something else, Adele, like on air. And so that unlocked another level of music journalism for me that I still do to this day.
I love it. So I have a question for you. What's the difference between the writer and the editor in these worlds?
The writer, I feel like the writer is you're trying to get all of your thoughts out there in an unfiltered way. So you're doing your best to literally put everything on the page that you feel about this record. And I think that's the best way to do it. First thought, best thought. Just get it out and we'll deal with it later. That's what I'm learning. The editor's job is to maintain the writer's voice, but not turn it into what they would write about something. I feel like all the best editors are like, okay, this needs a little bit of help, but I'm here to guide you along and not turn it into my piece. And so that's what I learned, especially working at Bandcamp, where it was just like, that was my first time as a full-time editor. And I never wanted to disrespect somebody who took time to write 3,000 words on Chilean jazz. You know what I'm saying? Because at the time I didn't know a whole lot about it. So I'm there to learn. I feel like the best editors are there to learn, and they're there to make sure that the structure of the piece is intact. Whereas the writer, if you're, the best hybrid is like the writer editor who understands both worlds, because as a writer who also edits, you don't want to turn in anything that the writer is going to be, or the editor is going to be like, yo, we can't salvage this. This is terrible. So I'm very cognizant of what I turn in these days, because I just don't want to make life hard for the editor, because I also know how that is too, where you got to kill a piece because there's just no saving it.
It's so interesting. I've never had anyone define both like that, and someone who's actually done both roles at a high level. But there's a direct correlation to being a music producer then, right? Because it's like all the records I produce over the years, my job is to make sure, like, when I worked with an XO, it's still an XO record, but let's add this element to it. Like, or the Godzilla record, like, it's still a Godzilla record, but like, let's add this element to it. But it has to remain Godzilla because it can't be what Yudu wants. Like, and I have to almost remove myself both as a fan and as a musician sometimes and say, we just need to tweak this or reorder this. So it's amazing to hear your description, because you, in a sense, are a producer of words then, like as a writer editor, it's almost like the musician producer.
Well, yeah, and it's the same deal now. Even like curating the New York Times thing. So I had I co-lead an editorial project at the New York Times called 5 Minutes to Make You Love Such and Such. So today it was 5 Minutes to Make You Love Sun Ra. So even though my name is on the piece, it's me curating. So that's what I'm curating. So I may write a blurb myself, but it's more so me saying, hey, Questlove, do you like Sun Ra? Do you have time to write 140 words on your favorite track? Hey, Don Richard, so I'm reaching out to all these people and I'm curating. And then when I get the blurbs in, my job then is to make sure that what they write stays intact, because they're writing from a place of feeling. A lot of their words are, I feel this when I hear Sun Ra. I feel this when I hear that track. So I can't then go in and be like, well, structurally, that's not correct because this is the New York Times. It's like, it's not that serious. And I just want to make sure that, like you said, with Godzilla, it's like, yeah, okay, my name is at the top of the piece, but this is really songs in the key of life. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, yeah, Stevie, but also you look in the liner notes and you're like, damn, you got Herbie, you got George Benson, you got all these people. So I want to be deferential to folks who are probably more who are smarter than me on these topics.
And you used the word just now that I want to kind of transition into, and we'll jump around because I want to talk about Bandcamp as well. But so the liner notes, which by far is a dope ass blog name for anything music related, is a newsletter that I subscribe to that you put out that, again, introduces me to things that I would never even think about looking for, right? And has exposed me to music, to sounds, to cultures, and in a way that I'm not. It forced me to stretch, which creatively has helped me a lot. Walk me through why you felt you needed to create the liner notes. In addition to, you write for the biggest companies and the biggest publications in the world, but the liner notes has this like uniqueness to it. Why did you feel like we needed that? And we do need it, but why did you feel like we need it?
Well, because even as much as I love writing for the New York Times and places like Entertainment Weekly and folks like that, I also understand that for better or for worse in their regard, I won't be able to write about some random spiritual jazz record from 1974 without a news hook. So I created the liner notes as sort of like a musical diary for me and me alone. And I created it at the behest of Meta/Facebook. So they reached out a couple of years ago. Yeah, they reached out a couple of years ago to my agent and was like, hey, does Marcus want to do a newsletter? Because they were ramping up their newsletters. And then I thought about it, and at first I was kind of anti-newsletter because I feel like everybody has a Substack. So I was like, how am I going to stand out? And so they kept pressing, and I was like, well, listen, if they're cool with me writing between 600 and 1,000 words on anything I want to cover, they got me. Otherwise, what do I add to this? And so I mention that as like, okay, there's definitely a need for people writing about Mad Lib's jazz period, writing about mind design, writing about Sylvia Robinson, but at the same time, I got to give them credit because they kind of gave me the green light to be like, yeah, cool. All right. You want to write about Chilean jazz? You want to write about Russian techno? Great. Go ahead and do it. But I feel like it's needed because, I mean, we've talked about this. It's like, I feel like there's the mainstream cats are going to get the love all the time. Anytime such and such, drops a record, they're going to get the headline. What about Billy Woods? Like, why have you heard Billy Woods? Like, I'm always on the other side, like, yo, why can't we give that same love and treatment to, Shabaka Hutchings, to like Nabaya Garcia, Georgia Ann Muldrow? Why can't we do that for them? They're just as dope, if not better. And so that's what the liner notes is. And it literally can be anything. It's, when I go out here today, maybe my ear will be attuned to early 70s Elton John for whatever reason. I'll just go with it, whether it's Alice, whether it's Indian horror music, it's like, it's just a funk record, people need to know about this. So I feel that it's important to stretch people beyond what they're used to because we're in the industry that's music, but it's not until you start conversing with people outside of the music industry that you realize that a lot of people don't really know how to find music. They don't really know music like that. So I always just kind of, for the lack of a better term, I always just kind of want to dirty it up a little bit. I want to make people feel a little like, oh, it's a little uneasy, but I like it and I don't know why. Like, I like covering stuff like that. And that's why I'm thankful that the liner notes still exists in that way, because it's literally whatever I want to do. And I will give myself this credit. I feel like I know what I'm talking about in terms of music, and I have an ear for what's good. So I just write about it, man. Like 1,200 words in and out, send it off to the team, to the artist, and it's gained this organic following that I appreciate.
I love it. So we can announce it now. The liner notes just got picked up by Tidal, which is huge. Congratulations to you working with the boss man Jay-Z on sharing niche sounds and inspirations. So you see this evolution. Now let's talk about that person that wants to be a writer. They're following suit. They probably wrote in high school. They probably wrote in college. They're getting started. In this day and age now, where, like you said, everybody can have a Substack or a newsletter or whatever, do you think someone should start with their version of the liner notes, or do you think someone should kind of go through what you went through and like start with the local paper and like bust their chops, or both, or like what's, do you look back and say, damn, I should have done this 15 years ago, or are you like, nah, this is the right time to do this?
I think that to answer that question, yeah, I think it was the right time to do it. I don't think I would have been ready in 2004 to cover music. Like it would have been cool to start earlier, but at the same time, I didn't have the chops. And I feel that even though the sort of road to getting on these days is a little easier, and I'm good, and I'm cool with that. I'm not one of these older guys where I'm like, oh no, they got to come up as hard as me, or it doesn't make any sense. Like I'm cool with it, but I do feel like you need to go through that pipeline of writing this article, writing that article, having the editor scream at you, or just scream in general. You need to go along the path. And I feel like as newspapers dry up, it's going to be a little more complicated. It's going to be a little harder to do that. But I find that when you have a foundation like that, that's just ground in solid journalism, solid writing, you can't take that away.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, again, maybe, old man yelling at cloud in this regard, but I feel like a lot of the kids want it right away because they're used to having everything right away. So they're used to everything being right there at their fingertips because they all have smartphones. And so I get a lot of writers who like maybe they had only been writing for like 6 months. And then they'll reach out and they'll say, like, oh, hey, who can I reach out to at Rolling Stone? Who can I reach out to at the New York Times? I want to write a piece for the New Yorker or whatever. And I'm like, well, I'm on the other side, like, that's all well and good, but you don't have the clips. I feel like you need to have some sort of experience to take to these people. I'm not saying that you have to have as much as like I needed to have. Like I needed to go in there with a binder full of stuff, but you still need to have a foundation that's rooted in just writing and not just music writing. And you need to go through the process of hardcore editing, like multiple rounds of edits, and not just because if you have a blog, there's no one to edit your blog.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put it out, and then you wonder why people are flaming you on Twitter. It's because this is just poorly written. So I think the foundation of anything is just good writing. And that goes back to an earlier question that you asked me about, like, what did I think was missing? Ultimately, I just wanted to bring good writing. And I think good writing, as much as, we get off on social media and likes and, follows and all that, nothing beats good writing. And I got to give credit to my friend Brianna Younger, who that's her thing. She's always like, Bree, she's always like, I just want to be the best writer possible. I'm not going to be super visible on social media, but you're going to get this Kendrick Lamar article. You're going to get this, whatever article, and it's going to be fire. And people talk about you differently when you're just a really dynamite writer.
Yeah, no, you and Bree definitely, I think, captured the space. And one of the things that I loved about it was, like, if people didn't know you, they wouldn't know you. So, like, there are a lot of people who knew Marcus J. Moore by the name at the bottom of the article, but would walk right past you at the Up and Up, or know Rihanna's name by the name at the bottom of the article, but would walk right past her at whatever event. So I love that you guys had that approach. Now, you said something about like the kids wanting it easy. I'm sure you're familiar with ChatGPT and like AI and that whole movement.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about newspapers drying up. I can only imagine, like, I can't even imagine what the next 10 years of journalism looks like, where like someone like me could write 2,000 words, put it in ChatGPT and say, edit this as if it's being written for the New Yorker, and get something kicked back to me that is faster and smarter than a human being could be. What's your take on like the future of journalism now that AI is here and it obviously is not going anywhere?
I don't mind it. I don't mind things like that because, kind of going back to the premise, it's like, dag, I wish we had that, I wish I had that in 2003, 2004, but, it just wasn't there. So I'm not mad at it. I can't be mad at evolution. I can't be mad at, here's this software that helps you edit and helps your voice. The one thing I will caution against that, though, is you don't really learn anything. Like, there is no learning. And I feel like the learning is the most important. You need to have real life experiences. And it's one thing to write a piece, you run it through some AI, and then it comes back clean. That's all well and good for your byline and for your bottom line, for your bank account. But you don't learn how to write. And what I found a lot of times when I was like hardcore editing is like a lot of the bylines that you see out here that people trumpet, that first draft is rough. That first draft, you could just tell, like, oh, okay, this person just either has been saved by good editors their whole lives, or they just flat out don't know how to write. And so I can't be mad at it, but at the same time, I can't fully embrace it because it's like, well, what kind of knowledge are you getting from it's not like you're going back and you're looking at your first draft and you're looking at the draft that was spit out by AI and you're like, okay, here's where I need to improve. Here's where I need to improve. Because things move so quickly these days. You're just like, okay, that's cool. Well, let me copy and paste, put it online. You don't, it feels like microwave journalism to me personally.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna chastise anybody who does it. I just don't think I can do it like that.
And I don't think you ever should, because the convo I had with a creator the other day about it was, I feel like what it actually will do is it will increase the value of the real writers and editors, right? And the only thing I can compare that to, you use the word microwave, so I'll use that version of it is like, but the version I used for them was, the reason Whole Foods can exist is that we know that the food that you're buying at a Walmart or at some of these other supermarkets isn't the best for you, right? It's beef, it's produce, it's food, but we know they're taking shortcuts to deliver that food to you. And the reason a Whole Foods will pop up and will kill a market is because people are like, nah, I want my beef to like be real beef. I want my tomatoes to be real tomatoes. I want my juice to be real juice. And so the more we're pumping out the inorganic items, the more valuable the organic items become. And I feel like in the creative world, what ChatGPT will actually do is it's going to create that line for the first time where it's like the inorganic, right? The person that can put 2,000 words in, spit it out, AI, copy and paste, upload it, and get it out the fastest will be appreciated by some. But the person that works with a team and writes from the heart and writes from experience and has a little bit of their DNA in it, and the editor then comes and cleans it up and may put it out a little later, there will be a group that always says, I'm going to wait for that.
And I appreciate you saying that because I'm learning from, it goes back to the whole chip on the shoulder, right? But it's another thing when people who you're a fan of, whose vinyl you have, are telling you that, like, no, your writing is valuable because of all the things you just said. And so that kind of reminds me, like, okay, real writing is the way to go. It's the way to stay, because you have people who are in these spaces who appreciate it. So not saying like, that you should live by outside validation, but it's just more of an affirmation of the road that you're on,
100%. No. So I'm well, let me talk about Bandcamp first, because I feel like that was a special time period for you. So we connected, we were friends, but we got close because you did an article on our studio. Well, it was supposed to be on our studio, and I fought you on this because I didn't want the article to be about me for a host of reasons. But you insisted. You said, Yudu, I can get you a Washington Post article because your story needs to be told. But the only catch is it must be your story. And I'm like, nah, like, we got a studio, we got a team, like, interview everybody. And you're like, I can do all that, but it's going to be about you. And my wife was one who finally was like, you have to step in this, like, you have to do it. Like, there aren't too many young Black men out there who are running successful businesses, who are at the epicenter of culture, who are hiding their faces. Like, you walk around and people in the studio don't even know you own the building. Like, and so we had a chance to connect over a period of months. And what I realized was journalism I had never experienced before was this. We just had conversations about life, about culture, about our upbringings, about our families, about our, what inspires us, what fears we have. And then one day you're like, all right, I'm done. And I'm like, done what? And you're like, yeah, I wrote the article. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, when do we do the interviews? Like,
based on what? What is this article?
Yeah. And that article changed my life. So I want to humbly thank you and say, like, you changed my life. That article was a turning point for me because it was the first time I had publicly spoken about myself, my past, my history, my journeys. And I got a taste of what it meant to be me comfortably. which I'd never, like in my whole life, I'd never done before. I mean, maybe when I was a kid, but as an adult, I'd never done that. And to see people appreciated the real me was like game changing. I don't know if there's another human being who could have done that better than you. So
Oh man,
thank
thank you.
you. So
Oh well,
that's like, I got to say that publicly. So Washington Post version of you, like, changed my life, changed my business, changed my career. Thank you.
oh, appreciate that, man. It's and I'm here to tell you, and I'm not just saying this, for public posturing. It changed both of our trajectories at the same time. And here's what I mean. Like, you know how it is. Like, you're a creative person. You can tell when something good is happening. You can't really put your finger on the thing. Like, you're like, something just feels different. It feels what I'm on now just feels good, you know. So I remember around that time, I guess that was what, 2015?
Mm-hmm.
Like 2015. So I had this momentum where I was, in the Washington Post regularly. I was covering concerts. I was doing these long features. I want to say a year prior, I had written a big old cover story on Diamond District for the Washington City paper. I'm at WTOP. I'm on air, and so I'm like, okay, this is trending in a certain way. And you mentioned Bandcamp at the time. I want to say that was 2015. They reached out. No, it was early 2016. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
They reached out and they were like, "Hey, we would love for you to have a hip hop column." And my buddy Joe Keys, J. Edward Keys, is on the phone with me saying that. And I'm like, "Cool, all right, no problem." So I just figured, okay, I'm doing all this cool stuff. I got a full-time gig with benefits, and now I have a hip hop column. All right, life is good. But at the same time, based on the article, based on everything else, that's when he calls me back and is like, well, actually, I got this senior editor gig here in New York. The only thing is you got to move up here, you know. So that's how Bandcamp came about in a big way, where it was just like he he and other people read that article because it was in the magazine. It's one thing to have it in like Washington Post. It was Washington Post magazine, and the whole cadence is different. So that's just a long way of saying that article helped me just as much as it helped you. So, I threw the lob, you threw the lob, whatever. We
Yeah.
both dunked it.
Yeah,
It's
we
all
both
good.
dunked it. It was the turning point because my parents finally realized that I wasn't a failure.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I
like,
feel
oh, so
that.
you can make money in music. I get it. Okay, I
Right. You
understand.
don't have to be a doctor.
You don't have to be the doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yeah, I
You can
feel
be
that.
whatever this is.
I feel that. I
so
feel
so
that.
you moved to New York. I remember those combos because there was some hesitation with you. Like that was a big leap for you. You were leaving. It's like everything was good in your life and you get this opportunity of a lifetime, but it's a big unknown in New York. Do you leave DMV where you're now a staple? You're the guy, right? Between you and Chris Richards, I feel like you were like the two music writers in the area.
Mhm.
Um, but you take the leap and you go to New York and you start writing for Bandcamp. Bandcamp, which is, I feel like they don't get the credit, right? I feel like in the world of Spotify, Apple, and everybody kind of bashing the DSPs, Bandcamp has stood 10 toes down from the beginning and said, we are really here for the artists, and they've shown it. You then become the editor and the senior editor for Bandcamp, curating from this list of hundreds of thousands or millions of songs. Which some of that writing was some of those articles were just like like I feel like if I was an artist on Bandcamp and you guys wrote about me, I've made it. Like that's like my Grammys. Tell me about that transition and that experience.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought it up. So it's like I knew also around that time, 2015,
I'm
that
not sure I understand. Sorry, she's gonna keep bothering us.
no, it's okay. It's okay. Shout out to Siri, you know.
Hey,
But
listening.
I know. So it's like, so around 2015, I also knew that, like, look, as much as I dig, as much as I dug DC, there was no path for me to like be the writer at a full-time gig there. So it's not like I knew that, like, okay, as much as I'm doing all this cool stuff for the Post, I'm doing at the time I was also like heavy reviewing a Pitchfork, which is like the top of the top of the top of music criticism. So I was there heavy, but I knew that that wasn't going to lead to me suddenly being in the building at WashingtonPost.com with a nameplate. You know what I'm saying? And a full-time salary. So I knew I had to do something different regardless. I knew that I was going to have to make my own way. So when Bandcamp came calling rather, um, I knew it was a road less traveled because that's kind of always how I wanted to be anyway. and that's always how I have been, whether it was like, fashion, whether it was the music I liked or whatever. I would rather go somewhere where where it's proving ground for something else bigger. So when I saw the opportunity at Bandcamp, I knew that that was going to be cool because I knew that it was one of these cool places that people knew about, but it was untapped market in terms of editorial. And I thought it was pretty exciting to be able to go to a place and just build it from the ground up or help build it from the ground up because it was me, it was Joe Keys, it was AJ, Ali Jane Grosson, it was Mariana Timoney, it was Jess Skolnick. We were just like we all have different sort of musical passions that we liked, and I was always the jazz underground hip hop dude. So it was exciting, it was it was literally just a green light for me to cover stuff that I thought was cool, and it opened up a world for me. Like I wasn't really like a jazz head until like 2016.
Mhm.
Because I would come home late at night and be like, yo, there's this old French jazz pianist. We should probably write a big old story on that. Oh, brother, all of his records are on Bandcamp. We should probably do a feature. So that's essentially what I was doing, which is curating like just cool stuff, man. Or if I discovered something I thought was interesting, we're just getting a good writer on it. And it was hard in the early days because again, it's Bandcamp and it's not, a lot of the pushback that we got is like, well, why would I do the story there when I can just go to pitch for it? You know. But then after a while that tide turned and you started seeing more mainstream artists wanting to have a Bandcamp feature. And to this day, yeah, it's their page views are kind of crazy
Mhm.
these days. So that was a thing that we just built up as a small team in 2016. And the New York Times was interested then. Ben Ratliff came to the office and wrote like a story about what we were doing.
Mhm.
So that was another turning point. So I feel like between 2014 2016 was like a turning point for me personally and
Mhm.
creatively.
Yeah. So 2014, 2016, you go from, I'll say, journalist to you've always been a curator, but now you're wearing like the editorial curation hat. And then around that time, I feel like you started. This is again when I talk about
Yeah.
the guy who has an idea. Our article was around my connection to Pimp a Butterfly, and then not too long after the article came out, you said, "Hey, I think I want to write about like just cultural moment. I think I'm gonna do a book on Kendrick and the power of this album and kind of what it is." I remember you saying that it had to be around 2016, 17, maybe. Maybe my
Mhm.
time's all, but I feel like it was around that time, right? Around Bandcamp era.
Yeah, it was around that time. It was around 20, I would say 2017 is when I in earnest was like, yeah, I think this is a thing I need to do because the idea was just still in the forefront of my head.
And so what inspired that? Because now again, obviously you take the road less traveled, but you've already taken one crazy leap of faith. You moved to Brooklyn from DC. You're the senior editor at Bandcamp. You guys have changed what that means, and you see this trajectory going up. And again, things are going well, everything's working.
Mhm.
What makes Marcus J. Moore say, you know what, while everything's working and going well, I'm gonna take this sharp left and go write a book?
That's fair. I again because the idea was just kind of in my head, man. So I don't even know if we've even talked about this privately. I have no idea, but so like around 2017, I'm at band camp, typical lunch break. And when I would walk to go get food, I would always have on my headphones. For this day, on this day in particular, I decided, yo, I want to just revisit To Pimp a Butterfly. And for whatever reason, I was just really taken by what was going on. I'm just like, man, I need to know how Bilal got here. I need to know how Thundercat got here. I need to know how Rob Glasper and Anna Wise and all these people, Terrace Martin. I just need to know, and that stemmed from Bandcamp. That stemmed from like me commissioning all these discovery type stories, where it's like we're taking random Afrobeat artists from 1975 and writing a story about how they came to music. And so it sort of translated to the book. So I think that seed was planted by Bandcamp, but it was also planted by people in the DC area who were like, yo, when are you going to write your own book? You should write a book. There was like people in my head, like, you should write a book. And so I knew I wanted to write one. I just didn't know on what. I didn't want to do a memoir because it's like, at the time, I don't think anybody would care about that. But I just wanted to write about this cultural moment also because if you go to a bookstore, you can see a million books on Springsteen, on Dylan, on David Bowie, on like landmark artists, but you don't see the same on Black artists. You know, you don't. I noticed that. Like, how come? Why can't Kendrick have a book right now? It's no different than what Amiri Baraka was doing in the '60s. You know, like when you look at the book Black Music, he's writing about Ornette Coleman coming up. He's writing about Miles. He's writing about Pharoah Sanders. And that's cool because he was literally capturing the scene as it was on its way up. And so then when you look back at it 50 years later, you're like, oh, okay, this is what was happening at the time, and it provides new context. So I wanted to do the same thing with this book. Like I knew that a lot of people would say, oh, it's too early. He's still on the come up. And I'm like, well, no, it's not about his career in totality. It's about this moment in time. Because I mean, we were all there. He was arguably the biggest star in the world, like not just musically, like Kendrick Lamar was like the dude, you know. And I just wanted to capture it, as corny as it sounds. I wanted to pay homage to it. I didn't want people to forget it, because if we can read about this moment in time from rock and roll artists, I feel like we need to be giving that same energy to rap and hip hop and underground jazz in a literary space. And that's the same reason why I'm doing De La, because it's like everybody knows De La, right? But it's like, well, why can't De La have a book? You know, De La deserves a book. So that's kind of where all my stuff stems from, man. It's like, you know, to answer the question about you know, taking these sharp lefts, it's literally about just daring to be different. I think it's ultimate. That's what I tell kids. That's what I tell students. Like, just dare to be different. That's what I wanted to do with the book and with Bandcamp. Is just be different.
And what I love about the book and the liner notes and almost any article you've ever shared with me or shared is I was the kid who, when I got the album, I would open it up and read about these people behind the sounds. That was me as a kid with Michael Jackson albums. That was me as a kid with Nas albums. That was me with Jay-Z albums. So, and then we didn't have the internet. So I would see a name like Rod Temperton and be like, oh, okay, I don't know who that is and what he does, but I know he's done a lot. Right. I would see these names around these artists, these engineers, these writers, these producers, these musicians. And you'd be like, oh, that person that played bass here is also on this album here. And you would start connecting these dots. And I feel like your writing does that for us. Even the book, right? The Butterfly Effect, like you said, is less about Kendrick, but it's about, for Kendrick to be Kendrick, he has to surround himself with Terrence Martins and Anna Wises and Thundercats and James Farleroy's and all these people who bring their sounds and bring their stories and bring their energies that made this album that will stand the test of time. And I love that you were bold enough to fight for the book to be written, because I remember early on when you know we were trying to help and figure out how to connect dots and all of that. And there was some pushback from not pushback, but TD, they were hesitant to, I think, be gloaty and be like, you know, is Kendrick in a place where he could write a book or have a book written this young and early in his career? And you said then, which I think makes even more sense now, of no, like, I'm not writing a Kendrick Lamar biography, but if I don't capture this moment as it's happening, 50 years from now, when people want to know, like, this album that's considered one of the top 100 albums of all time, how do they get the reference of like what it took to make the album? And so I admire you for like standing on that. And I believe that over time, Kendrick and that crew will appreciate it more over time, because again, that album's going to be on top 100 lists for the next 100 years. And when it's far removed from the era we were in, we will have this book to say what was going through Terrence Martin's head when this song was made. How did Anna Wise feel when this was made? What was happening in the world when this happened? How were people feeling at that time? So big ups to you for doing something that, like you said, the world may not have understood that it was needed, but you understood it was needed, much like liner notes, much like music journalism in Washington Post, and much like the discovery that you're doing and curation that you're doing now with Tidal, and much like I know the De La Soul book is going to be needed, especially just hearing yesterday that their music is finally going to be on all the streaming platforms.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say about it. First of all, I appreciate you saying that, man. And I will say this though, like, ultimately what I wanted to do with that Kendrick book was also humanize the guy, because it's like I wanted to pay homage to that moment in time because it was a great moment in time. But I also wanted to just kind of let people know, the next Kendrick know, like, hey, he is a superstar, but here's a guy who still struggles with these things. He still, he still has self-doubt, he still has survivor's remorse, all of this stuff that we all deal with. So I just wanted to paint a picture of this guy who, like, ultimately you too, if you work hard or if you surround yourself with the right people, you too can be that person. And so I like how you said like years later people will discover it, because that was my focus. My focus was like, I wanted to be where when my godson gets of age, he'll like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And I didn't write it for this day and time alone. I wrote it more so for like 20 years later, 30 years later, when some kid discovers it either on like a sidewalk or like it's in a $2 bin somewhere. They'll pick it up and they're like, oh wow, I didn't know. And so that leads to more discovery, that it's a time capsule about Kendrick, about the rise of West Coast jazz, about the killings of like Trayvon Martin and all these people. So that was a lot of the pushback was because people were expecting just a straightforward book on Kendrick. But then when they got the book and they were like, okay, it's on Kendrick, but it's also about all this other stuff. I think it was a lot for people. And I get it. Like, for the most part, it's been a lot of love, so I'm going to lean into the love. But I also understood the people who were like, I just couldn't get through it because it was just a lot. And I get it, because that time period was a lot. And so naturally, yeah, so naturally it came through in my writing too.
Damn. So you use a word that I love, because I feel like that I'm looking forward to the Daylight book. I'm hoping this becomes a series that you do forever moving forward, is time capsule, right? I feel like you're creating these time capsule, these moments. Even I remember the Odyssey article that you did, the Diamond District article that you did. And I remember, like, if you're not from the DC area, if you're not into hip hop and like boom bap hip hop at that, you probably aren't going to care about a Diamond District article. But if you are, that article will stand the test of time, because you captured not just Diamond District, but you captured the importance of Diamond District to the Washington, D.C. music scene, and how many of us stood on their backs, embracing, like, we don't have to follow this trend this way. We can make music for this group here. There's this large group that respects us, and those guys being able to travel and those guys seeing the success they did made it okay, I think, for a group of artists to say, I can also create that kind of music. So I love that you capture these time capsules. I'm looking forward to the Daylight book. I'm not even going to ask you when it's coming out, because I know that adds unnecessary pressure.
I don't even know at this point when it's coming out, but it'll be out.
I'm looking forward to it. I hope I get an early preview at some point. And I'm sure hey bro, check this out. Tell me what you think. I'm not going to take too much more of your time, Marcus. I think, to get to like wrapping, I want to speak also to, 2017, get into the book. Part of the book writing process, you went to Africa for a little bit of time. And you are one of my few, I would say, American friends who actually took the leap and went to Africa. Because I'm the guy who comes back and tells everybody, yo, Africa's the future, Africa's the future. You know me in the text groups, like, yo, Africa, Africa. But you're one of the few who actually was like, yo, bro, I'm gonna move to Africa. Now, I'll let you tell where and when and the timing, but like, what did that time living in Africa, and the artwork on your wall behind you is mostly from there. Africa's a continent, you'll speak to the country, but like, what did that do for you as a writer, journalist, author, and curator? What did that time in Africa, where were you, and what did it do for you?
Yeah, so in 2019, my wife gets back from a work trip where she had to go to Nairobi to, I think she had to convene some meetings in Nairobi. And so she comes back in, her eyes are super wide, and she's like, hey, how do you feel about moving to Nairobi? Nairobi is the next wave. They got great artwork. The weather is perfect. I know some people there. We should just do it. And I was like, and it was a 5-minute conversation. I was like, yeah, all I need is a Wi-Fi connection. Let's get it cracking. And I knew we were keeping this place. So I was like, okay, well, cool. Because ultimately it's like, well, we knew we were going to do the back and forth, like 6 months there, 6 months here. So But yeah, it's almost this indescribable thing that you feel whenever you get there and you realize you're in a black country and that the billboards are black and there's black people on TV. And it's just black people being regular on TV. We're not being superheroes. We're not trying to save somebody. It's just black person just, watching TV and somebody delivers some food or something, it's stuff like that. So I found that creatively speaking, it really helped me because it was an easier lifestyle. Because it's slower. I mean, New York, as much as I love New York is incredibly fast. And sometimes it can breathe down your neck a little bit. But it was kind of cool to go from that pace to a slower pace where I could meditate more on the book. And so that's why the book has more of a meditative feel because I had time and space and energy to dedicate to sentence structure and making sure this thought is clearly conveyed and exploring these different avenues that maybe other writers wouldn't explore. So I had time and space to do that. But just practically speaking, also, it was like 7 to 8 hours ahead. So I could buy myself some time. So I could wake up early there, write a chapter, and then my email is not lighting up until like 5 p.m. on some other stuff. So it's like, okay, during the day, I'm author. But then at 5 p.m. Nairobi time, now all of a sudden I tap into, oh, hey, such and such needs a review. Oh, hey, can you write liner notes for this vinyl project or whatever? So it helped me sort of discern and dissect different avenues of my creativity. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like it definitely has its challenges living there full time. Like, I learned that after a while, I never realized how much I needed sidewalks until I lived in Nairobi, because that's a lot of me. A lot of it is like, okay, I got this cool record I'm interested in. I'm gonna put it on my phone. I'm gonna walk around with it. A little tougher to do on Riverside Drive when you're kind of dodging, cars and whatnot. But overall, it was a really cool space with really cool people. It was a lot like DC in the way that if people discover you're doing a thing, they're all over you. They're like, "Oh man, like you're writing that book. When does it come out?" And that's all they want to talk about. So I would say that was part of the downside too, where it's just like, "Hey, my wife is over here launching the business. Let's talk about that." But they wanted to talk about Kendrick. Oh, can you bring Kendrick here? And I'm like, probably not. But but my wife though, she's doing this thing. So that was sort of the experience. So all in all, we lived there 2.5 years, from I guess that's 2020 to no, I'll take that back, like a year and a half or something like that. But we got back in 2021.
Yeah, I love that for you, man. I was jealous because that's my dream. 6 months there, 6 months here. And you did it. And you're like, yeah, we're keeping a Brooklyn spot and we'll be in Nairobi and I'll never be cold. And I was like, man, like he's living the dream. He's
Trying to.
Man's in Kenya when I'm cold. Like, that's not fair.
But I can deal with cold. Here's the thing, like I don't mind the cold. Now my wife, on the other hand, can't fool with it. But I personally, if I see that the high is gonna be 20, I'm like, all right, cool. Let me just layer up and I'm gonna still go to this cafe. But that's just me. I'm just weird like that, I guess. I don't know.
Oh man. So you said something when you were in Nairobi, and we've talked about this privately. So as a music journalist, right? So like putting records out, even now I just put a record out, and like the vanity side of it as a creator is like you want the exposure, right? You want the plays, you want the streams, you want the eyeballs. And there's in the world of playlisting and all of that, because you are a curator, because you're a journalist, because you're an author, you get countless people reaching out to you trying to get on because if you write my name, you validate me, right? That's the reality of your life. Like you are the guy that if you write my name or write my song's name, people will respect it. That's been a joy, but I know it's also something you've struggled with and like you've had to adjust to. What advice do you give to an up and coming artist trying to get on the radar of a Marcus J. Moore?
I would say, again, it goes back to what I was saying about my own career, just dare to be different. I get a lot of music that sounds like other music. So I'll get a lot of music, like even yesterday, it's like I get something and then I'm actually going to click play. Like I'm going to check it out. I'm not going to give it the time of day if it sounds just like something else I can hear on a Spotify playlist. I've seen it happen this way for now, what, 14, 15 years, where like it's the different person that ultimately wins. Don't get me wrong, the money is probably not going to be as quick. The ascension is not going to be as rapid, but I guarantee it's the other people, the others, it's the Moses Sumneys and the Billy Woods and the, Nick Hakim, like people like that, where it's like, yeah, they're doing a genre that you recognize, but at the same time, they're putting a little something different on it to make it them and make them stand out. So that's what I always tell people. It's like if you listen to the radio and you try to do a carbon copy of what you hear, it's not gonna work, because it's like, well, then okay, your competition is literally Kendrick or Beyonce. What are you gonna do to make a program director stop playing plastic off the sofa and play your record? And if it sounds just like that, then I have no reason to check it out. And don't get me wrong, like everything is derivative of something else. So if you're inspired by something that's mainstream, you still got to do something to put your own spin on it, or you got to keep at it until you have your own voice, your own focus. So that's what I would say. Like, send me the crazy stuff. You know what I'm saying? I'm not afraid of like the noisy psych jazz record, the random hip hop art rap hip hop joint. Like, send me stuff that's different, because I'm not gonna give light or shine or credence to stuff that sounds like literally everything else. Because then what can I write about you that I can't write about somebody else? I like to be challenged.
Yeah.
I like I got to go somewhere and I got to think hard about this next phrasing and how I'm going to describe it. That's challenge. That's exciting to me.
Thank you. And so now, as an aspiring artist, if I'm trying to get on the radar and I feel like I'm different and I feel like my music's dope, where does Marcus J. Moore find his music? Like, where does the curator curate?
I spend a lot of time on Bandcamp, just kind of running through there. So I'll click on a jazz tag and I'll just kind of go through the different pages and see what's going on. I will obviously I get a lot of stuff sent to me, so I'm thankful for that. I get a ton of stuff sent to me. So these days I don't do as much curation in that regard as I would want, because again, I can sit back and like records just come at me. But when it's time to like do some crate digging, it's definitely Bandcamp. It's I watch a lot of like TV shows with good music supervision. So a lot of times I'm Shazamming stuff, or quite honestly, like I'll go back and I'll try to check a lot of old stuff that maybe didn't get the light that it should have gotten when it came out. Like I'm really big. I've become that dude too, where it's like even my first liner notes column that's coming out in a few weeks, or I guess a week or so. It's about this guy. It's about this record that got reissued last year, but it originally came out in 1975, and no one paid it any attention. So I'm one of those types too. But I would say, that's a long way of saying, like, honestly, a lot of times it's Bandcamp, but it's also just TV and just real life, friends, things like that.
Now the TV is real, man. We were watching, I can't remember what show it was, and a Sun Little record played on the last scene of a show, and I Shazammed it, and I fell in love with his music. Bought tickets, got to meet him. He actually came to the studio. Like, we're cool now, but like the song was years old. It was like 4 or 5 years old when I Shazammed it, and it made me go back and listen to his entire catalog. Because I was like, man, like whoever, like that dude, like it sounds like something from 1970s, but this record came out 5 years ago. Like, who is this dude? Where is he? Oh, he's in Philly. Oh, okay, bet. Like, yo, I'm in DC. And he wasn't big enough to the time yet where like I could send him a message and he responded. And then like, obviously one of the perks of having a studio at the time was like, yo, when you're in DC, come through. And so that, but I tell artists all the time that the road to being found, obviously, even with the record I just dropped, like I'm releasing it. A, it's my creative outlet, but B, I want to get in the head of the artists that I'm helping with 24/7 artists of, okay, I put this record out. I just loaded, I have 59 listeners, right? Like, so like for an artist, like I could obviously send this to my contacts at Tidal and Spotify and Apple and get it on 30 playlists tomorrow. But I'm trying to figure out, like, for the kid who doesn't have those emails, like their minds are racing. Like, how do I go from 59 listeners to 500 listeners to 5,000 listeners? Like, they're trying to figure out, like, and how do I not bug a Marcus J. Moore? Like, what's the balancing act of sending my music and waiting and following up and submitting the playlist? And like, so what advice do you give to somebody who's like 59 plays and I'm trying to get to 500?
That's fair. What I would say, I mean, I can only speak for myself personally. I can't really say for my colleagues. I don't mind being bugged. As crazy as that sounds, like I know that might be like, what? Like, I don't mind it because I get it. Like I understand. And I'm not going to take full credit for that thought. I got to give Mabinti, my wife, a ton of credit for that because she used to be a publicist years ago. And she's like, no, you got to understand that even if you respond and you say no, you got to respond. You got to let these people know that they're seen because they got to report back to people as well. So I try to implement that with artists as well. It's like, look, I'm super busy. We're all busy. But I don't mind you following up. Like, it's cool. I would say don't follow up like a day later. Like, at least give me a week. But after a week, you can just be like, hey, I just want to get your thoughts on. Hey, I'm circling back. Because I understand because there is so much music out there and you're trying to get people to listen. And I'm one of the rare people. And I will also give, I know I'm name dropping, but I'm trying to do it in a good way. Hanif Abdul Rakib, another music journalist, author, he listens to a lot of stuff too. But people like us, we listen. You know, we're gonna check it out. I can't say we're gonna like everything, but follow up, and you may be surprised by your answer. You may be surprised by where it goes. You know,
I love it, and also what you said, it doesn't have to be new because I it's something I impress on these artists. I'm like, man, like that song that you put out that resonated and people believe in. Okay, it's got 80,000 plays on Spotify, but keep pushing. And pushing for me is like music, TV, film, and use in creative ways because you never know who's going to fall in love with that record. We've been talking about doing this, and we will do it. Our text group, the Ghana trip. There's a record store in the Arts Center in Ghana. It's an outdoor record store. When I say this place has gems, Marcus, you are going to lose your mind. Like, you go and they've got, I mean, the records are from they're the original records from the 70s, 60s, 80s. Like, it's pop, it's fusion, it's disco, it's funk. And they're old. Some of them probably don't even work, but just like the liner notes, like the guys there know me because whenever I go to the Art Center, I'll spend an hour just like, I'll always buy, they know I'm going to buy, but I'll spend an hour just going through the notes and like looking at the artwork and looking at like the design and looking at like, damn, Quincy Jones is a part of this like random African 1970s album. Like, so I'm excited for us because you've made me with liner notes appreciate what's not new. And I will admit, like, I was getting caught up in the hype of like the new as well. And what liner notes has done for me, what your writing has done for me, has made me realize like, no, like there is stuff from the 1970s that's new to me. There's stuff from the 1980s from Russia that's new to me. There's stuff from the Czech Republic or Finland or France or South Africa that's new to me. And you've helped me. I'm not a curator like you and my wife and some of these folks that I know who just have a great ear. I'm a bandwagon jumper. I'll admit that publicly. All right, Marcus says it's hot. I'm a listen. So so keep curating for the bandwagoners like me, please.
I'm gonna do what I can. I'm trying to keep it interesting. I can't sit here and lie to you and say that the pressure doesn't mount every year, but I'm learning to like, okay, no, just stick with stuff that I like and just go from there.
Bro, you already know you in your Jordan period right now, bro. You know what it is.
I'm trying, man. I really am. Like even now, like the reason why I'm dressed up is because I'm about to run to a cafe and work on this profile that I got edits back on yesterday. So yeah, man. And I just love what I do, bro.
Man, well, thank you, Marcus. I appreciate this convo. This is the first of many. We gonna do some cool stuff in the 24/7 world too. When we start doing our programming, I've already told you you already doing all the stuff I want to do. So I'm gonna just throw my logo on what you're doing and figure out how to jump on your bandwagon. But we're gonna do some conversations because I feel like I can have this convo with people I'm cool with. Like that, this is easy for me because this isn't work. But like there are stories in our world that need to be told, and your ability to translate those stories in a palatable way. Again, like I said, no one else could have told my story like you. I hold you to the highest regard for that. So when we get to telling some of these stories, when we get to start sharing the people behind the music at all levels. I want to do that with you. I've told you that in person. I'm putting it out there publicly because now it forces us both to make it happen.
I was about to say, like, all right,
Forces
man.
us to make it happen. But I'm super proud of you, man. Like what you're doing with Liner Notes at Tidal, what you're doing as an author, what you're doing as a curator, what you're doing as a big brother. Like the other thing I want to speak to is like you're a writer who's putting other writers on and writers of color. Like, let me give you your flowers for that. There are younger writers who you've taken under your wing and you've thrown the alley-oop to. You could have written these stories. I know that. And you've been like, nah, I'm gonna give that to this person so they get the story, so they get the look, so they get the Pitchfork or the Rolling Stone or whatever look. Like that says a lot about the person you are. And I want to make sure the world knows, like, beyond being Marcus J. Moore, the journalist, author, curator, you are also one of my closest friends, and I appreciate you for who you are.
Oh man, I really appreciate that, man. Thank you so much, bro. I'm doing what I can, man. So thank you for the conversation.
Man, you better keep doing it. And we're gonna do one of these with me, you, and Kokai so the world can see actually what we'll do is when we pull up to the bar, I'm gonna just have a camera crew come through so they can see the conversation slowly decline.
Oh
as
yeah,
we're going through our rounds.
I'm ready. Listen, man, I'm an open book, bro. You're still gonna get these words, bro, but you might get a little ignorant at the double house bar.
And I can always tell because the tone changes. It's like, so what about? It's like, oh God.
Exactly. Here we go. Let's get it. Old fashioned number 5 coming up.
Oh man, brother Marcus. Last thing we usually do is, and we'll close with this. What advice do you give to young Marcus J. Moore coming up, who's starting out and trying to figure out how to make it in this world today?
I'm telling young Marcus to don't give up. There are going to be days when you feel like what you're doing is not viable. You're going to feel like no one is paying attention to you because you are different and you are a rare bird and you like things that others may not be on yet, but just stay the course and it's going to come around in your favor and you're going to be pleasantly surprised by the love that you get on the other side.
And with that, we are 24/7 artists. Thank you, my brother Marcus J. Moore.